and welcome to my new series, Clumsy Crafting, not Cozy Crafting, because Cozy Crafting somewhat implies that I know what I'm doing. Truth is, I'm very much in the process of still learning how to make things, and one example of this is the fact that I had this pre-saved earring design, but I did not make a basic one, so this is one that I had to make from scratch. These were meant to be pins and not earrings, but as you will see later, that things did not exactly go according to plan, and that's part of the reason why this series is called Clumsy Crafting. But as the adage goes, you gotta start somewhere, so I haven't hesitated to be doing this stuff as I go and learning as I go. Typically, I use this Photoshop trick with Cricut Design Space in order to enhance the quality of what I'm printing, since Cricut Design Space doesn't handle raster images very well. But since these are going to be printed on shrink plastic, I didn't think it was necessary, as the design itself is going to shrink down rather than it being a one-to-one print. Using Tech Wrap translucent shrink plastic paper, it says vinyl sticker on the front with the packaging for some reason, but as you can see with the barcode, it actually listed as what it is, and it comes with a neat little guide. We're going to be printing on the matte side of this paper and not the glossy side. I don't know exactly why that is, since in my experience it tends to be the opposite, but that's what the instructions say. In my limited experience, this paper tends to darken the colors a bit, so I am looking to get their white paper instead for some of my other designs, but this is what I'm going to be using for now. I am kind of hesitant to do many prints on it though, because of how much ink that I'm missing at the moment, and also the fact that it is pretty tedious to work with. I actually print using my printer to manage the colors because none of the other quote-unquote tricks anyone else has shown me has worked very well, and printer allows me to manually adjust how it's going to print. These are the earrings I made last time, by the way. They turned out much bigger than I wanted them to, but I think some people still like chunky earrings, so those are going to be available as soon as possible. Here's how the actual print itself is turning out, and as you can see, the colors look pretty nice in the light here, but since it does shrink down when you heat it up, it is going to change. And here are also the settings I'm using. You're supposed to use a deep cut blade with the Cricut for this, for when you're cutting something with plastic. But you can technically use a fine point blade, you just want to be able to access replacements for it, because it's probably going to wear down that blade a lot more, and it's going to be trickier to work with. I just don't have easy access to a deep cut blade, whereas my local store has easy replacements for a fine point blade, so I figure I might as well replace it and then worry about getting a deep cut blade later. Also using the Cricut purple heavy grip mat because it is lighter in color, and since this is a transparent material, it can mess up the sensor marks if you use something that's darker. Also want to be very careful about aligning the sensor marks. First couple test prints with this paper did not go well. So might depend on the brand of shrink plastic paper that you're using. I don't know if there are those that are thicker, which might cause more issues with the fine point blade, but you know. A more expensive brand was looking into on Amazon, but since I wanted to go ahead and get a handle on shrink plastic paper, I decided to go ahead and get this cheaper version from Tech Wrap, and I don't think it's all that bad. And use the other version for a point of comparison. As you can see here, it does cut kind of messy. Most of this stuff can be cleaned off, thankfully. It also cut a little bit unevenly. I did 7 passes this time instead of the 6 passes I did last time when printing the earrings because of how difficult it was to get those out. But the uneven cut didn't actually cause issues at the end of the day. You can see here I'm trying to cut off as much excess plastic as possible to make this as much of a painless experience as I possibly can. This is still paper despite it being plastic, so it will tear, it will rip, it is fragile. You have to be careful when it comes to popping these things out. It's not as simple as something like sticker paper. So don't want to cut completely through with your scissors because it will create this rip at the end of the cut that can cut into your design if you're not careful. Mainly doing partial cuts when cutting these out. Very messy version of one that has been retrieved from the paper. I went back and I peeled off some of the excess from these before I actually went about baking them. The guides that I've seen about doing this, it helps to put these face down because it helps to reduce the degree of the curl, as well as having the curl be in a way where if you use something like resin or embossing powder, which I'm looking into using embossing powder, it sets up the curl in a way that it doesn't mess up that process later. The instructions for these said to set the oven to 320 degrees Fahrenheit, so that's what I've done here, and I'm using this to flatten the stuff out afterwards. I'm also putting on my air purifier, which is covered in dust, ironically enough, and I'm opening up a window despite it being rainy outside because it is advisable to be doing stuff with plastic in a well-filtered space. Though I am just working with small amounts of plastic, and while I'm waiting for the oven to preheat, I'm shutting down my other equipment so that can be safely stored away. Not having fancy dust covers or anything, so I do use these little blankets because I figure that something is better than nothing. The equipment was not cheap, so I am trying to preserve it to the best of my ability, even though that ability is kind of restricted in a studio apartment setting. And here is a little time lapse of the shrink plastic curling up. The process for this, it doesn't really have a designated time. I imagine it takes longer the bigger the piece that you're doing. but the idea is to take them out once they've flattened again after curling. You use something like this book to flatten it out afterwards. This is a very beat up copy of a Dragon Quest game guide. Don't ask me why I had this. A piece of parchment paper in between to avoid damaging the material. Here's how they turned out, with the front side coming in just a second, and since I can't do resin on a rainy day, follow more for part 2. Thank you for watching.